I'm delighted to see you're very engaged in the process. You can really consider this a first approximation. And because there are many ways of looking at movement, of assessing movement in the world. And in the Feldenkrais method, in the first year in particular, you know, you're learning to make distinctions. And I remember the first time somebody asked me, you know, what do you see? Nothing. A person. You know, I had this idea that was such a right thing to see that I couldn't even notice what I was seeing. And then it takes time. You're all going to notice some things differently than others. And we can develop a common language, but some words will be easier for others, and vice versa. Okay, so it's a first approximation. So what did you come up with? Let's hear some of your ideas.
It made a big difference to the overall organisation of the thought. I might be jumping down.
So actually, thank you for jumping in. Could I ask you to show us what you saw?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Overall, it made a big difference if the foot was over to one side or another as to how much movement there was through the overall spine.
Yeah.
Particularly with one of something. Yeah.
So did you come up with a way of describing where the foot was? Like did fit it relative to the midline of the body, or right or left? Well, how did you...
So the further right the foot was, the more connection there was through the torso.
Okay. So for the moment, we'll leave the connection through the torso, because it's the relationships that you see that we're looking. We're not about improving the movement at this point in time necessarily, but what can we see?
I think one of the factors with that as well was that...
I had the microphone here, I thought.
I think one of the factors with that as well, and it's probably different for everyone, but with me was that if my foot was further right rather than being in the midline, that then the weight shifted on my pelvis on the right more as a starting position, which meant then that it was easier to roll to the left.
So could you please show us? We'll share real estate in here a little bit.
So initially I had my foot kind of more in the middle. Sorry.
Oh, no, I'll hold it for you.
Initially I had my foot more in the middle, and this was how I was doing it in the ATM, and it felt quite strange because then when I moved my foot when I shifted to the left, it was like a real effort through my middle, and then to come back, I could only go so far, and it was like a real strain to come back. Whereas just then when I saw Judy, and then I was like, oh, let me try that. It sort of shifted my weight a little bit more onto this side. So then when I went to move my knees to the left, it was a lot easier to kind of get that gentle, and I could go further, shifting my weight from one side of my pelvis to the other.
So you're noticing the influence of the organisation of yourself to how comfortable the movement felt. And if we want to distill out what it is that you actually notice, so it's the position of the feet, it's the relationship of the feet to the midline that you noticed.
Yeah, and perhaps the pelvic weight, whether the weight was in the middle or on one side of the pelvis as well.
Contact with the ground.
Yes, yeah.
But then there's also another something in there. So where the weight is on her pelvis, you can feel that. Could you see that? Okay. So did you have any ideas how you might describe that, where the weight is on the pelvis? Pardon? Tilted?
To the right.
Tilted. So if the pelvis is tilted, it has a certain relationship with the ground and a certain
orientation.
orientation relative to herself. So orientation implies space. But within that space, there's a relationship. So it's either one's own space and relationship to oneself, forward of oneself, backward of oneself, upward, or relative to the room. Upwards to the ceiling was in the Ruth's ATM this morning, you know, or relative to gravity. So orientation has this, you know, overarching. There's orientation of a part, and there's to something. The room, the space, the floor, oneself. Can you put them in the? Are you putting them in the columns, Ruth? In case they come in the columns, if you can, or we'll do it later. You can do that? Great. Thank you. Yes, that's great. Don't put them in the columns yet.
We have to actually pick them.
Fantastic. So, thank you very much.
Sorry, one more question.
Stop. I have to learn this, and this is a really good way of playing with it in as many different ways as possible.
Yeah.
It seemed as though we couldn't say that the right foot was orientated, but we could say the pelvis was. Could we say that the foot was orientated to the right as well?
Yes?
Yes.
But to do that, remember that it has a if you wanted to say, if I said to you my foot was orientated to the right, how clearly does that describe where my foot is? Okay, so then you understand that it's not so clear, so you can give more information to the right of her, where was it? The right of her pelvis? The right of the midline? Okay.
I was just observing what Melissa was doing, and I was doing exactly the opposite. I felt more comfortable with my foot in the center because I felt that it gives me more a stronger base of support for me to move on the mat for myself. So that's what I started with. The movement is shifting my base of support to an area where I find comfortable.
So would you like to keep the microphone and say what you observed in movement? In your group,
in movement?
in that movement, could you show us something that you?
No, you can't do it.
Okay.
Could you hold the microphone so she can show us? And if you can't see, please move yourself where you can.
So before I started the movement, I shifted my foot here in the center. Because this feels more comfortable for me. Then I move here. And then I started the whole thing.
So again, we're talking about a relationship, a distance between the foot and the pelvis.
And
the relationship to the midline.
That's too close, I can't move. So I had to find a place where I can sort of like tilt without having to hold my breath or sucking my stomach in and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And this feels more comfortable than over here. For me, yes. This is my organisation.
Okay.
And this seems to allow me to be able to have the best orientation towards where I need to be, which is this side.
So come back. So you noticed the orientation of the intention. What did you notice? And you, Ray?
When what we did notice was that the movement started. See that her. I'll try again. That her knee appeared to. I thought her knee was leading the movement rather than her pelvis.
Okay, so knee leading the movement. So that's something.
But getting feedback, she was saying that she was pushing off a foot.
So any ideas about how we might describe that? It's where they're saying, they're talking about where they think the movement started. It is an organisation.
It's a timing thing.
It could be
It's a little. Yeah, we had this conversation.
So, where the movement begins. We could just say where the movement begins.
Initiation. Yeah.
Initiation. Yeah? Do you want to say something else that you found?
Well, when she did the movement, she initiated, then a pelvis kicked in, then a thoracic kicked in, and then the head did. But the interesting thing was that her head continued on past, well, looked out of sync with the rest of her body.
Okay, so that's a rate of movement,
Yeah.
if I paraphrase your words. But also in there was the pelvis moving, the thorax moving, the head moving. So there's a sequence or a kinematic linkage, or one part, then the next, then the next.
Yep, makes sense. Yep.
Yeah? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth because it's
Don't
really...
have a jump. No, it's good. Yeah.
Would that be timing as well, like in terms of that sequence, actually choosing to order it in that way, or?
What do people think? This is where we could have a debate. I saw nodding over there. You think it's timing? Yeah, please.
I guess in our group there was quite a difference between the timing of the whole movement itself in terms of the speed, but then also the way different parts were brought in throughout the movement.
So we've got speed.
So.
And can you say again?
For example, initiation of the using the movement of the thorax happened at different points, I suppose, or movement of the head happened at different parts relative to the pelvis, for example. So then, for some, there was perhaps more movement of the pelvis before the head started to move, or the head and the pelvis tended to move more together. Yeah. So again, the timing of that.
Can anyone think of a word that might describe that? How different parts come together in an action.
So it's kind of relative to, so head moves in relation to how the head moved in relation to the pelvis, how the thoracic moved in relation to the pelvis. So it's relation individual level
and the whole.
And the whole.
How one part relates to another. Coordination. Does that fit? You know? How do we coordinate ourselves in life, in room? And
Did you say timing variation in coordination?
Yes. Silvana, is that your hand up?
Orientation, waiting for when it's okay.
That's okay. The lights, I see it's got the bright light at the back of you there, so it's...
Now I don't know if I was going to answer a question or mention something, but anyway, I'll mention something. So, for me, I was quite intrigued with the word perceivables because through the exercise, what became really obvious to me is that perceivables can mean so many different things in terms of timing, orientation and organisation, within yourself. But there are so many more variables between what perceivables in those three things mean when you look at what you sense versus what you observe. So, for example, my starting position, I spent a lot of time exploring where to place my feet and a lot less time in the actual turn. And Simon and Danielle moved from that phase very quickly into the turning, and we were trying to work out why we each did that. And so Simon and Danielle had a very clear observation in their mind as to why I placed my foot and kept moving my foot in that particular direction. So their perception was that it fell into one of those types of categories. But then when they asked me what I felt, my sensation was purely that I was doing that to see where I felt most comfortable. And my answer and my perception fell in a different category to theirs. So I guess what I'm trying to say is perceivables could be one of the 3 different areas, but it was also intriguing how the perceivables change based on whether you're asking someone what do they feel versus what you observe. Does that make sense? I'm not explaining.
No, I'm getting it. I'm getting it. But there's a whole lot of things in there. So what we feel and what someone observes won't necessarily initially be a match.
Agreed. That's probably the quicker way to say what I was trying to say.
And in this, and I think it's very easy when you're not, if I'm a bit vague about the process that you're doing, because I'm trying to leave it pretty open for you to discover for yourselves. And so it's easier to get caught on a little sidetrack. Now, it's both a little and big sidetrack, because where you place your foot does have a big, can have, not necessarily does, can have a big influence on how comfortably and how ably you are to do the movement. And it will vary from one person to another. Now, at the beginning, it's very easy for us to want to say, well, this was right for me, then how come that doesn't feel right for somebody else? And they're really good questions to ask. But another way of asking the question is say is, what's happening in them that they feel that is the most comfortable way to organise themselves for them right now? To try and start to see what's the relationship, or what are they able to do, or what is not available to them at this moment. Because, none of us are perfect. We've all got holdings and patterns and things, and so we've got to love those about ourselves, because that's what's going to help each other learn. I got sidetracked then.
I understand. I understand what you mean.
Yeah. So, what I mean by perceivables is the sensor, for when you're observing it on yourself, it's a experience that is usually sensorially based, but it's in relationship to your skeleton, what you can sense, what you can feel against the floor. When you're visually observing someone, often our habits of seeing will direct our attention, direct what we see and how we see it. And then there's our beliefs about what we think is right, and our understanding of how the exploration was framed, that can all take us in slightly various directions. And I think it's really important to, be with each other as learners to recognise that this is a process.
Yeah, and that's what we did. That's what was so intriguing about it, that we realised that you needed all of those components to be able to see everything. You needed to know what the other person was sensing. You needed to know what you were observing. The person sensing it needed to know what you had observed on them to try and figure it out. It was just, I guess it just comes back to there were lots of options and lots of different ways to learn what you were feeling or seeing.
Yeah. And I think you've already noticed that or had the experience that what you see and what you feel on somebody else, sometimes you get more information, sometimes it's less information or different information. So we're just, exploring the visual at this moment. Thank you.
We felt that there was a lot of correlation between organisation and orientation, that there's a lot of overlap.
Could you show us what you mean?
I'll try. So there'll be a part of that sentence whereas timing was a lot clearer to be distinct about. So if we use what we've all been talking about, which is where you put your foot, that is both a question of orientation, and different people do it differently. So I'm trained as an architect, and I've thought in 3 planes of space like that an awful lot. So I'm very conscious of that medial line, and I would call that orientation. But we also observed the difference where I think between the 3 of us there was a big range of organisation, one organising this movement and then pausing and then organising again, and at the far extreme, the other having the final place already in mind, so that with Simon, already as he was putting his foot down, he had in his organisation that his back was going to arch and his arms going to end up. You see, so there's a sort of how far your image is organised, whether you're just taking a close observation of that first step, or whether you're in a far-reaching.
So I picked
Perception.
up at least 3 things in what you said, and the first one was the pause and the speed in both aspects, whether you moved far or whether you didn't move far. And the other interesting thing that Danielle said was plane. So planes of movement are something, and Judy said it yesterday in terms of talking about the kinesphere, you know, and directions. She talked about what were the 3 planes you talked about? Table plane. Could you show the table plane? Wheel plane. Door plane. So these are fairly classic frames of reference. And may you bend your legs again for me, please? I was very glad. So even here, we could say is Danielle's leg in a plane. Just right there. So if her legs were like that, so it's the relationship that, so I'm going to, it's hard not to keep talking, Stephanie. Okay, so planes. And the other thing you said, Danielle, it's about Simon. And could you do Simon's movement for me again, please? If it's comfortable for you. How you showed. Okay. So here we've got a range variation. So we've got a little range of movement and a big range of movement. Both very different. We're not talking about right or wrong. We're just talking about what we can see. You know, I could ask Simon to move less, and I could ask someone else to move more. But it's just how far somebody goes in the movement is something that we observe. Yeah? Thank you. That's okay. I'm not going to get... Yeah. I'd say if we asked everybody, I'd say at least 98% of us, one time in that lesson, put the other leg over, or vice versa. So it does change the movement. But you'll find out you can do it once you know what you're doing, you can do it any way you like.
I think the distinction that I was trying to make was that Simon's organisation from moment 1 envisaged the whole thing, even if he didn't go there. It was as if he had an image, and that would have been at the end of your lesson.
And you could see that.
Well, I felt that I could.
Okay, yeah, great.
Certainly.
No, I'm just checking in, because what I'm hearing is that you almost could see the completed act right from the beginning.
I could sort of see the intent of it.
Of it. So it had a certain shape and direction.
There was already quite a holistic
pathway.
Yeah, something like that.
Or direction through space.
Yeah, and quite a complex direction. So as opposed to looking at something in simple steps, there or there, which is very interesting, then this whole whole complex movement.
Yes. So you brought up I think the interesting fact that different movements show up different things. You know, actually, in my practice, if I get stuck for an idea, I'll change something, like change the orientation of the person, change the movement, change the speed, until something shows up that interests us. Okay. Please. Thank you.
I'm just stuck with a little bit of confusion in...
Good.
What? Yes. Can someone help me just define like coordination in comparison to organization? Like I'm not really getting a sense of what the organization is compared to coordination.
Well, I'm thinking of the word organisation being very far-reaching, and the way that everything through your nervous system is organising your whole organism, but coordination referring to maybe a sequence or a particular set of parts that are waiting for one another so that they're coordinated together in time.
Mm-hmm. In time. Does that help, Anka? Yeah.
Is that like when I was we were watching, some people's head moved earlier than others, or we watched people like segment as they moved their knees, and you could watch that movement moving, and then the head came in. So it's like the timing that different parts come in. Is that what coordination is?
Cool. Anyone else got something? So the other thing with Martin.
What we noticed that one of us adjusted the feet quite a few times, but then when I was trying it on the mat, I could actually see the difference, and I was wondering where that comes in. Like I'm doing my exercises on a yoga mat, which is not slippery, and if you do it on a slippery surface, it affects the movement quite a bit. So where would that, for me it's environment, but where would you, I find if you manipulate the environment, you get a different quality of movement.
Mm-hmm.
That was my observation.
Any comments? Anyone got any ideas about how you would bring that, the environment in here? In relationship to what Martine's saying about the surface the feet are on. Orientation, but they're on something. Yes, you could describe it that way.
But the quality of the movement depends very much on the surface. If you have to adjust, if your feet slip away when you move to the side.
Yeah, mink blanket. We found that on the mink blanket over there, too. To what? Did you want to say something, Margaret?
I just said adjustability of the movement.
Okay, adjustability. I'm letting that. Did you want to say something too? Yeah. Okay, and then Simon.
I thought I had to reorganize myself.
Mm-hmm.
So would go to organization.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually wanting to put it into timing, because sometimes when you talk about movement surfaces, they talk about fast floors and slow floors.
Uh-huh.
And so the friction has an impact on the movement.
Okay,
and the speed.
We've got surface, haven't we? Surface foot, I like that. And one is not wrong and one is not right. It's just, can you understand what someone's saying, and does it make sense in a way, or is there something more? I think sometimes, sometimes I can think of things as shifting into... Sorry, did you want to? I was orientating my attention over here and not taking in the environment over here. No, it's okay. No. Yeah.
No, sorry. Just one thing that it just reminded me with the surface of the floor as well, that we noticed was how the foot conformed to the floor. So whether you kept your foot perfectly still and whether the movement came more from your ankle or whether your foot shifted on the floor to take the weight more on the lateral border or the kind of medial border of your foot. And that sort of changed where the weight was, I suppose, for your foot.
So that's the supporting surface. So something to do with the ground. And I think it does probably fit in with the adaptability and gravity. And then there's the orientation. So if you're on a slippery surface and you can organise the weight, the structure of yourself to be going straight down, then maybe that slippery surface, your foot's not going to slide. But if your leg is all in another plane or at another angle or relationship to your body, then maybe your foot is more likely to slide.
What I noticed yesterday in the FI too, that we used one of those round bolsters. I was lying on my side, and that's again surface environment. I was lying on the side, and when my shoulder was moved and I had it on the bolster, it gave it a much more smoother movement, a further movement, and I didn't feel as restricted. I could relax more. So for me, that's almost manipulating the environment, but it's like...
And we do that. In FI, you will learn to do that.
Following on from that,
Thank you, Mark.
we also had a slippery mat scenario, and it just occurs to me that there can be a reorganisation of the environment itself, or I could reorganise myself to accommodate the environment. So I could either tense up my leg so my foot doesn't slide, which is going to affect how I perform the whole action, or what I did was get a towel and put that down so my foot didn't slide anymore, so I could do the action in the way that I wanted to do it previously.
Great. Change yourself, change the environment.
It just reminds me that I come across that a fair bit in acro because depending on what people are wearing.
Sorry, I didn't catch what you said at the beginning.
I come across that idea of friction or non-friction a fair bit in acro balance, because when you're standing on someone, depending on what they're wearing or if it's their skin or anything else, depends on a fair bit. But then we learn in time that depending on how you place yourself and you bring your weight onto that person, it doesn't really matter anymore what they wear, because if you can follow your pressure through the body in the right way, then and hold onto the balance in the right way, then you stop. But when we were beginners, we really worried about what we were wearing, how we were wearing it, moving stuff around. But as we moved on, we realised that it wasn't as important. But it took a while to. Yeah, it's interesting, that sort of stuff of like, how much is it? Can you move around it, or do you really need to change it?
Yes. So it's the ground. Relationship foot to ground. So it's ground as well. Yeah. So just push slash or underneath. So it's how you relate to the ground or the supporting surface. Hello again. Very mobile.
What Yona was saying, we actually do in occupational therapy, we actually get different outcomes depending on how we manipulate the environment, so we can achieve a different learning.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's something which comes into Feldenkrais.
Absolutely. But that's further down the track. But great that you're aware of it even now, because there will be times when it could serve you.
I was walking without crutches yesterday for shopping, and this morning I realized my foot hurts. And I think maybe I did not, I was not aware of the foot when I did that exercise. So I slid more.
You mean in this morning the ATM it was hurting,
Yeah, no,
not after
when I
shopping?
did-
Not
no,
after.
no. When we had a group, I was the one who had to adjust myself all the time. So I think to ease the pain, I'm not aware of the foot, so it slid.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. Any other hot comments, observations, questions?
So what we noticed at the end of the movement, when I forgot your name, Chilam was doing the whole movement of, I'll show you. So she adjusted her right leg in the center, and then she did like whatever the instructions were, and then followed the whole movement. Started from the foot, and the pelvis followed through the rib cage, thorax, and the head started to move, and then so it switched over straight away from the head. So the head lead the movement, rather than the movement was from here. Then the head actually led, and the next thing so at that particular timing, we noticed that head was the main component of the movement, and eyes were left behind. So we noticed that eyes was just jerky and felt like, oh, where am I? I'm left behind somewhere. And then she actually like followed the moment. So yeah, I don't know.
So anyone want to comment about what they understand? Tunisia? Yep.
Isn't that actually the pelvis initiating the movement?
So we thought that it's the pelvis, but there were two different views we had. I noticed that pelvis initiated the movement, but Chris noticed that it was from her knee, whereas when we got the feedback from Chi, was like from the actually foot was the one which initiated. So she actually had to put the weight onto the foot and initiate. So there were 3 points. Yep. I felt pelvis, and Chris noticed knee, whereas it was the foot. But also when Stephanie explained that we also have our habitual way of perceiving things, because I was initiating movement from my pelvis, so I straight away thought that it's the pelvis, but it wasn't.
So what I'm hearing there, I don't need this, do I? Slow learner. I'm hearing that there's something about this. Was both the initiation and some difference in what started the movement, but also there was something about the sequence of involvement. So that one part was moving before another part came in, and it's not dissimilar to coordination, but sequence has a certain direction in it. And it might be like the rocket going to Mars, or, could be coordinated, everything in one direction, but sequencing from the pelvis to the head or the head to the pelvis. Sorry, Simon, did you want to say something else to that?
It's possibly not necessary, but
okay.
Let's just, but I'll say it anyway. Maybe it's just sort of getting lost in the semantics of it or definition, but to me, I would say if the foot is initiating the movement, then that can't happen unless the pelvis is actually leading the movement, because the foot by itself has no impetus.
And what I would say is in this particular exploration that we're not sort of getting into the pros and cons or efficiency of one way or another, but just seeing what's happening, as is the as we do in the Feldenkrais method. How are you doing the movement? And then exploration of trying other different ways, not saying, well, I found this the most efficient way, we'll do it that way. And here, we're just beginning to see, what do we see? what's easiest for us to see? What other people see do we go, what? You know, and then opening the possibilities so that we have more options of what we can see and more ways of talking to each other when there's a difference in opinion that you're having, that you can say, now what do you mean by that? You know, and so that, or that you can refer it back to here, and you say, I think it's to do with the timing, so that you can find a way of clarifying the communication with one another.
I did a Martina. Yes, because the difference, what I saw when I watched this person move, was that their head took over 2/3 of the way through, and all of a sudden that's where the attention went, and there was a jump between when it didn't shift up the spine, it jumped. Whereas when I watched the people in my group, we were watching the way that the movement, it was like you could see it moving and there wasn't any, it maintained its connection through from that part of the body to this part of the body. So it was about coordination and timing.
And Margaret, is there another way that you could say the difference between the head and the rest of the body apart from took over? I'll help you if you...
Something about direction. Do you want to have a go?
Yeah.
Leading. So leading, leading. That one suddenly led, but it was
or moving in a bigger range.
Moving in a bigger range, which just took off in a slightly different direction. That the pelvis suggested it would go this way, and then when it got to this point in the movement, all of a sudden the head was leading the movement, and it took off in an unexpected direction.
Yeah. So directions.
We had a little observation like about the head as well being involved in the movement, and I had experienced it in myself before, and then we observed it with each other that at some point there was a movement of the head, especially like when coming back, that when there was a sense of potential effort, like shifting that weight of the knees back over the pelvis, like I guess it's a leverage sort of thing, and then it was like the eyes and the head wanting to sort of like then there was more of an initiation through the head to start with, or a likelihood, like it shifted through the time of observation, but the movement of the eyes and the head seemed to sort of be connected to willpower or like effort.
Effort. You saw effort. Yeah, okay, that's another one. Thank you.
I think since I first encountered Feldenkrais, the core seemed to me about the spine and its rotation, and I'm just observing that you can't see the spine, so you're always looking at something else that tells you about the spine, and it somehow bears on what we're watching.
So a way that we can move is turning, rotating, and you were able to see that rotating through the relationship of the parts changing. Yeah? So... organisation. Exactly. Is that, well... some are clearer than others. You know, some of the categories are clear.
That category is
clear.
And there were other ones that were like...
would it be here or would it be there or...
We have another word completely that was very... When we had other words that came
yes.
They actually, they hit. You can feel it when the word...
lands.
Lands. And I like that visceral sense of this word has landed, I know what that means.
So we'll do some more of this observation in other different movements and see if we can pull it together a little to have some shape and form by the end of the 2 weeks. So
one last question.
Yep.
You hear about the quality of the movement being described. So is quality a composite term of everything that we have just discussed, or is it relates to effortless or least efforting, that sort of quality? I mean, you hear this all the time in FI. Look at this quality. So what does that actually mean? Like, other than the jerkiness, lack of, or smoothness, and also the effortless situation.
So I'd ask you a question. What do you when you see a movement that you feel has a certain quality? You said smooth. Anything else?
Effort. If I see them efforting, such as holding the breath, I know that it is not a quality.
So a quality is no unnecessary effort, no effort, smoothness. Anyone else?
Definition of
Flow?
Yeah.
So
even timing.
Timing, yes, there is a certain timing in there.
What's tonus?
Tonus is the bigger discussion, but the level of contractility in the muscular tissue. So, I've got a lot of tone right now. Floppy.
Everything being
Sorry? Everything being involved. Yes. Another aspect of quality when the whole self is involved. Inclusiveness, inclusive attention, and inclusive of the whole self. Yep.
Something like coherence.
Coherence.
Oh yes. Oh, and
Yep.
So a movement which you drinking your tea in the morning, looking to see if you're going to miss the train. There's a sort of incoherence, whereas a dancer moving in a envisaged way. I don't know if that's a good example, but do you know what I mean?
I understand what you mean.
A certain coherence in the whole organism following the same intent.
I like it. Coherence.
Like you describing how Simon, you could see where that was going before he was in. When you described Simon's movement, when he didn't actually pause and stop in that first stance. He moved straight into the movement, and you felt you could see all of the movement all the way through him actually doing the movement.
So coherence, I think it's a beautiful word. And the word Moshe would probably use, just to give you another alternative, is harmonious. You heard that word before? Yeah. So qualities of movement, that's a capacity of the self to organise, to perform the intention. So, great. So enough for now, I think. Good job. So let's take lunch. And I think it's a longer lunch today. An hour and a half? Okay, and we're giving FIs at lunchtime. So that means we'll be back at 2.
It's negotiable, but often yes.
Yeah. Usually start straight away. Where's Christine?